She was walking into her shift, scrubs on, ID badge around her neck, coffee in hand. Another long night at the hospital ahead. That's when the sirens lit her up. In seconds, her hands were up, her bag on the ground, two cops shouting over each other. She tried to explain, didn't matter, she was black, alone, and that was enough for them. What they didn't know was where she worked, who knew her, and what would happen an hour later, when the hospital director stepped outside and made a decision that would shake the whole building. Chantel Morris had been a nurse for over a decade, 34 years old, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Her mother had been a nurse before her, and Chantel carried that legacy like armor. She wasn't just good at her job, she was respected, trusted, one of those people who remembered every patient's name, every doctor's coffee order, and stayed 2 hours late without a word of complaint. That evening started like so many others. She left her apartment around 5:45 p.m., just early enough to beat traffic and grab her usual iced coffee before heading into St. Joseph's Medical Center, where she worked the night shift in the trauma ward. Her drive was uneventful. The sun was setting behind the buildings, painting the sky orange as she turned into the hospital's employee parking lot, a spot she'd parked in hundreds of times before. And that's when it happened. Blue lights, loudspeaker commands. At first, she thought they were after someone else. Maybe a high-speed chase nearby, maybe an accident. She even glanced around her, confused, but the two officers walked straight up to her window. Hands on the wheel. Now. One of them had his hand near his holster. The other circled her car, peering through the back seat window. Chantel rolled her window down cautiously. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." She hesitated, then complied. Her nurse ID badge swung as she moved. "I work here," she said calmly. "I'm just starting my shift." "License and registration," one snapped, ignoring her. The other officer chimed in. "We got a report about a stolen vehicle matching this description." Chantel blinked. "This is my car." They didn't care. They asked no follow-up questions, didn't ask her name. Within seconds, they had her bag on the ground, her hands behind her back, wrists wrapped in cold steel. She was in her own workplace's parking lot, wearing scrubs, holding a hospital ID, didn't matter. A few nurses walking in from the shuttle stop froze when they saw what was happening. One of them, a young man named Devin, recognized Chantel immediately. "Hey, that's Nurse Morris," he called out. "She works here." But one of the officers shoved his hand toward Devin. "Back off, this is police business." "Then call the hospital. You're detaining a nurse right before her shift." Chantel tried again to speak up. "Please, check my ID. I'm not who you're looking for." The taller officer scoffed. "You match the description. Black woman, black SUV." That was it. That was the reason. Chantel's heart was pounding, not just from fear, but from disbelief. The humiliation of being handcuffed in front of her colleagues, of being treated like a criminal for trying to work. Minutes passed. Then a half hour. The officers made no move to release her, even after dispatch radioed in that the stolen vehicle in question had already been recovered. Different model, different color, a white male driver. Still, they kept her there. A crowd had begun to gather near the hospital entrance. Doctors, nurses, security guards. Even a few patients on crutches or wheelchairs stopped to see what was going on. Inside, word spread like wildfire. In the trauma bay, Dr. Miguel Carter, the hospital's medical director, was reviewing a patient chart when his assistant burst in. "There's something happening outside. Chantel Morris has been detained by police. Staff are saying it's a mistake." He looked up. "Detained for what?" "No one knows. She was arriving for shift. They put her in cuffs." Carter stood so fast his chair fell backwards. Without saying a word, he strode down the hallway, through the ER, past the waiting room, and out the automatic glass doors. What he saw outside stopped him cold. One of his best nurses was sitting on the curb, cuffed, her face pale and still. Two officers stood beside her, arms crossed like bouncers. He didn't blink. He didn't pause. He walked straight toward them. "She works here," he said sharply. "Release her, now." One of the cops turned. "Sir, this is a police investigation." "No, it's harassment," Carter said, voice low but firm. "You've detained a medical professional on private property without cause. "You are obstructing hospital operations and compromising patient care." The officer opened his mouth to reply, but Carter cut him off. "If you don't uncuff her in the next 10 seconds, I will call legal, the press, and the mayor's office. And I'll start by having hospital security remove you from this lot." Chantel looked up. Her eyes were glassy, but she held her chin high. She didn't want pity. She wanted justice. The younger officer hesitated, then slowly reached for the key. The handcuffs clicked open. No apology, no explanation, just a muttered, "You're free to go." And the officers began to walk off like nothing had happened. Carter turned to Chantel. "Are you okay?" She nodded faintly. "Yeah, just... I need to breathe." He walked with her back inside, but it wasn't over, not even close. Inside the hospital, tensions were rising. Staff members wanted answers. Nurses were crying in break rooms. Patients had questions. Phones were ringing at reception non-stop. And Carter had a decision to make, a real one. Because this wasn't just about one nurse. It was about what kind of place this hospital claimed to be, and how far they'd go to protect their people. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next, because this story is far from over. Doctor. Carter didn't go back to his office. He didn't check his schedule or stop to answer the growing number of calls buzzing through his phone. He walked straight to the administrative wing and told his assistant to gather the senior staff. "I want the boardroom full in 15 minutes, he said. "Everyone, legal, PR, chief of staff, security." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The way he said it was enough. While Chantel was in the employee lounge, surrounded by co-workers trying to offer comfort, the hospital leadership was already in emergency mode. Some were confused, others were furious. But Carter was calm, focused. "This isn't about PR damage," he said once everyone had sat down. "This is about who we are. One of our own was publicly humiliated and detained on our property without cause. If we don't take action, we're complicit." He turned to the head of legal. "I want an incident report filed within the hour. I want the body cam footage. I want the name of every officer who touched her. And I want a formal complaint filed with the Atlanta PD Civilian Oversight Board." Then he turned to the chief of communications. "I want a statement drafted. Not some corporate nonsense, a real statement, where we say exactly what happened, exactly why it was wrong, and exactly what we're doing about it." The room was silent for a beat, and then someone asked the question that had been hanging in the air. "Do we really want to go public with this? You know how these things get twisted." Carter didn't blink. "Yes, we do. Because if they can cuff a black nurse in our parking lot for matching a description, what does that say to every black staff member here? That we'll keep quiet to keep the peace?" He leaned forward. "There is no peace. Not for them. Not unless we make one." Meanwhile, Chantel hadn't said much. She hadn't cried. She just sat quietly replaying the moment again and again in her head. How quickly things had gone from normal to surreal. How fast she went from respected nurse to criminal suspect. She could still feel the cold of the cuffs around her wrists. Still hear the officer's voice saying, "You match the description." It wasn't new, not to her, not to anyone who looked like her. But this time it happened at work, in front of people who knew her. And somehow, that made it worse. Devin, the young nurse who had spoken up earlier, sat beside her. "I'm so sorry," he said. "We should have done more." "You did enough," she replied softly. "You spoke up. You saw me." He nodded, but the guilt stayed in his eyes. And as word spread through the hospital, more staff came by to check on her. ER doctors, janitors, food service workers, everyone had heard. Everyone had something to say. And none of it was okay. "I've worked here 15 years, said a lab tech. "Never seen anything like that. I'm sick." "We need to walk out," someone whispered. "We need to do something." But it turned out they wouldn't have to plan a protest. Carter was already planning something bigger. At 9:03 p.m., just over 3 hours after the incident, St. Joseph's Medical Center issued a public statement across all platforms, website, social media, internal employee systems. It was short, direct, and impossible to ignore. "Earlier this evening, one of our nurses was wrongfully detained by law enforcement officers in our employee parking lot while reporting for duty. She was not resisting. She was not under suspicion. She was simply arriving for her shift. This act was unjust, discriminatory, and unacceptable. We are actively pursuing legal action and demanding full accountability. At St. Joseph's, we do not stand by when our people are treated as threats because of the color of their skin. We stand with them. Period. Dr. Miguel Carter, Medical Director. The post exploded in minutes. Comments poured in. Shares multiplied by the thousands. Former patients spoke out, saying they remembered Chantel, how kind she'd been, how she'd held their hand when they were scared. Other nurses across the country reposted it with hashtags like #ISTAND with Chantel and Can't Protect Black Nurses. News outlets picked it up by morning. CNN, local stations, even international headlines. A viral video showed up on Twitter. Someone had recorded the incident from the ER lobby through the glass doors. You could see the officers pushing Chantel against the car. You could hear her saying, "I work here." And you could see the disbelief on the faces of hospital staff, watching helplessly. By noon the next day, the mayor's office had issued a statement. So had the Atlanta Police Department. The 2 officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The department promised full cooperation. But for St. Joseph's, it wasn't enough. Dr. Carter made it clear in follow-up interviews, "We're not backing down until policy changes are made, not just apologies. Real, systemic changes to how law enforcement interacts with healthcare workers, and especially healthcare workers of color." Inside the hospital, things were changing too. Staff began organizing internal town halls, discussions on race, safety, implicit bias. Employees shared stories they'd kept quiet for years, times they'd been stopped, questioned, doubted, despite working there for decades. A janitor named Mr. Reggie, who had cleaned the ICU floor for 22 years, stood up during one session. "I walk through the back dock every night," he said. "Security still asks for my badge, still acts like they've never seen me before." Heads nodded, eyes watered. It wasn't just about Chantel anymore. It was about all of them. And as for Chantel, she took a week off, not because the hospital told her to, but because Carter insisted. "Not a break," he said, "a reset. Your job will be here. We'll be here. You're not alone." When she came back the next Monday, she didn't walk in alone. She was met at the front doors by dozens of hospital staff. Doctors, nurses, admin workers, janitors, all wearing black pins that said, "I see you." They stood silent as she passed, then broke into applause. She didn't cry, not until she reached the elevator, and even then she smiled through the tears, not because the pain was gone, but because this time someone had stood up. Not after the fact, not behind closed doors, right there, in front of everyone. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories like this that need to be told.